Week 10 is almost in the book, so I'm bringing you 10 must-add players, both off of waiver wire and trades for Week 11 fantasy football. And when we started off on the waiver wire, the first player we're going to be talking about, it's going to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling for the New Orleans Saints. And that feels insane to say because it was just only a few years ago where MVS was missing catches for both the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. But when he got his time to shine here for the New Orleans Saints this week, dude absolutely demolished with 3 catches for 109 yards and 2 total receptions. And when we look at the PFF overall snap share, of course we had no Chris Olave in this game. We had no Rashid Shaheed because he's out for season. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had 29 snaps, 18 routes run, and 3 total targets. When we look at the overall snap share of these receiving weapons for the Saints, wasn't too hot. But the thing that we do know is that the Saints are willing to air it out with this staff, with Clint Kubiak, with Derek Carr. And like we said, we don't know when Chris Olave is going to return this season. So MVS is super interesting because catching 2 touchdowns on 3 catches, that's probably not the most doable going down the stretch. But when we start to then look at him over here on Sleeper, the thing that we're going to see, of course, is that he is 2% rostered right now after this 25-point performance. Like we said, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 109 yards, 36 yards per target, 36 yards per catch, and the 2 total touchdowns. So, like I said, he's rostered in 2% of leagues right now. He's going to be the number 1 waiver wire target that you need to be adding going forward. Definitely be targeting some Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He's my first waiver wire ad that you need to be adding. Now, my second waiver wire ad, it is going to be Ricky Pearsall for the San Francisco 49ers. And he's been kind of a popular ad stash. And a lot of people have been adding him, dropping him all over the board. Now, he is a little bit more rostered than MVS right now. He is 55% rostered. But this week put up 17 fantasy points after putting up 11 fantasy points in week 8. Let's not forget, Ricky Pearsall was drafted in the first round to the San Francisco 49ers. Was kind of slotted in to be their wide receiver 3 even before we saw Brandon Ayuk get hurt. But now we got Juwan Jennings, we got Ricky Pearsall, and I think Ricky Pearsall is a lot more talented of a wide receiver than Juwan Jennings. So as much as Juwan Jennings did have that big day earlier on the season, but 6 targets, 4 receptions for 73 yards, and 1 total touchdown. See CMC come back from his injury. And when we start to look, though, Ricky Pearsall, at least on a wide receiver snap share, dude only had 41 snaps compared to Deebo, who had 50, and then 58 for Juwan Jennings. So I think as Ricky gets more and more used to it, he's going to eventually overtake Juwan Jennings in this offense. I mean, Juwan Jennings had 11 total targets. So I'm not trying to say that right now Ricky Pearsall has passed Juwan Jennings because it's very clear that Juwan Jennings is higher rated for the 49ers based on his snap share and his target share. But I think Ricky Pearsall is a guy that you need to be adding onto your teams just because, like we said, with that 55% rostered over here on Sleeper, dude needs to be added to your team immediately. He's gone through a lot. 50 Cent, took a gunshot, comes back. We absolutely love to see Ricky Pearsall as my second must waiver wire ad for the week. My third must waiver wire ad for the week, it is going to be Audric Estime. And if you tuned into the stash video on Saturday, the one thing that I did Audric Estime in the video about was that Sean Payton said he wanted to see what Audric Estime was going to be able to do and how they were going to be able to get him more touches. In this game versus the Kansas City Chiefs, Audric Estime did get 26 snaps compared to Javonte Williams 16 and 7 for Jaleel McLaughlin. Had 8 total routes run compared to 10 for Javonte Williams, but the carries was the biggest thing. Javonte only had 1. Audric Estime had 14. We have seen Javonte Williams' role in previous seasons start to decline towards the second half of the season, and that's exactly what happened today with Audric Estime. Now, it wasn't like Audric Estime, with getting all the snaps, ended up being just an absolute OG of a running back, where we're looking at him this week, only had 14 attempts for 53 yards, 3.79 yards per carry, only put up 5.3 fantasy points in full PPR. So it's not like we're talking about Audric Estime being some absolute league winner, but right now he's 7% rostered. I think if you need a high touch volume running back, I know there's a lot of us going out there with 0 RBs or RB2 spots super weak. I think Audric Estime is definitely worthy of a waiver wire ad, not only based on that roster availability, but also just based on the fact that he did get a majority of the work this week. So Audric Estime, third waiver wire target. My fourth waiver wire target, it's going to be Jaylen Warren for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this week, we saw Jaylen Warren maybe get the highest amount of snaps we've seen all season, with him getting 35 compared to Najee Harris 37. And now while Najee Harris still got 21 carries, we saw Jaylen Warren get 14. And we've talked about how in the offseason, it was kind of the debate on, hey, is Najee Harris the Thunder, Jaylen Warren's the Lightning, who's going to be more beneficial for fantasy football purposes? Up to this point this season, it has been all Najee Harris. But when we start to look at Jaylen Warren over here, 54% roster, a little bit more rostered than MVS, of course, Audric Estime level running backs, but 9.5 fantasy points this week with those carries and with those targets, he is definitely someone that, especially coming down the stretch, Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Philadelphia, this team might struggle to run up the gut because those are some very strong teams. And if they can get Jaylen Warren involved on the outside, more as like we kind of are always referring Jaylen Warren to being more of a scat back type, that is 100% going to be benefiting Jaylen Warren down the stretch. Definitely need to be adding Jaylen Warren to your fantasy football rosters if he is available. And we'll bring you 2 more waiver wire ads for this week. The next guy we're going to be talking about, it's going to be Jalen Coker for the Carolina Panthers. And we talked about Jalen Coker last week as a waiver wire ad, and we're talking about him again this week. He's only 13% rostered. Since that big breakout day that he had in week 8 versus Denver, where he had 17.8 fantasy points, it's been 5.6 and 7 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. So hasn't been ideal. But the thing that we love to see with Jalen Coker, he had 53 snaps, so he was the second highest snap earner this week for the Carolina Panthers wide receivers, and he had 8 total targets. So he had almost a 34% target share this week, which is absolutely insane. Granted, I know it's for the Carolina Panthers, so it's not like the best organization, not the best level of targets, but 13% roster. This is a guy that going forward, I definitely think you need to be considering at the end of your bench, need to be considering adding, because Carolina Panthers, we know they got the bye this next week, but then it's Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Dallas. Like, they're not going to be able to run super well with Chuba Hubbard. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton. And so that is why I just kind of believe that Jalen Coker is a guy that I want to be adding. And the last and final guy we're going to be talking about on this waiver wire ad list is going to be Adonai Mitchell for the Indianapolis Colts. And we saw this week with no Michael Pittman Jr. that Adonai Mitchell actually led the team in snaps with 60 total snaps, outsnapped Alec Pierce, outsnapped Josh Downs, had 6 targets. Now, granted, Josh Downs and Alec Pierce both out-targeted Adonai Mitchell, but going forward, I know it wasn't great for Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco didn't look good with the interceptions. Adonai Mitchell is a guy that I'm intrigued about because they did use that second-round pick on him, and I've been saying for a while that I thought they would start to get him more involved. Like I said, he's only 17% roster, but put up 13.1 fantasy points, had those 6 targets, 6 receptions, 71 yards. Now, he did have that fumble, so that did hurt him a little bit, but I do think Adonai Mitchell is a guy that going down the line, especially as we're adding players to our waiver wire, if you need some help at the wide receiver position, as much as we feel like it's kind of like a crapshoot week in and week out, I think Adonai Mitchell, especially in deeper leagues, if none of these other guys ahead of him are available, then I would definitely be targeting some Adonai Mitchell. Now, we move on to players that you should be trying to trade for right now. Most trade deadlines are this week or next week, so we'll be putting out a little bit more detailed of a trade video later this week. But the first guy I want to talk about is going to be Malik Nabers, who really, since he's come back, since like week 4, it just hasn't really been the same when we're looking in full PPR, like week 7 versus Philadelphia, 8, 14, 14, 10 fantasy points for Malik Nabers. So I understand he was targeted 10 times. It didn't happen for him today. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about Malik Nabers, and I'm sure you guys are starting to get a little bit worried about Malik Nabers. So I would just kind of keep an eye on Malik Nabers. We'll show some real life trades on Tuesday's video. I've been showing trades on this video, but it feels like a lot of the trades that actually are getting done that are showing up on the trade database are done before the week's game, so I feel like it's kind of skewed and not like happening in real time. The next guy we're going to be talking about here, and we'll just type in his name and talk about him right here. It's going to be Tony Pollard. When we're looking at Tony Pollard this week, only 10.3 fantasy points, 18, 14 the weeks before this. I understand it hasn't been ideal by any stretch of the imagination for Tony Pollard owners. Tony Pollard is a guy that going forward, I still have as a top 20 running back rest of the season. I know that's hard to believe, especially like next week. We like the Minnesota matchup. Houston's going to be a little bit tougher matchup, but especially when we get to the fantasy football playoffs, Jacksonville and Cincinnati are good matchups. And then he's got Indianapolis the week behind that. So like the matchups for Tony Pollard down the stretch, I understand having your running backs try to stay healthy, always a little bit of a rougher thing to try to do, but Tony Pollard's a guy that I'm looking to try to trade for. Like I said, we'll go a little bit more into depth on some trades on Tuesday's video. Next guy that we need to be targeting for trades is going to be Khalil Shakir for the Buffalo Bills. And when we're looking at Khalil Shakir, overall, dude has kind of taken over this wide receiver 1 role for the Buffalo Bills. Now, we did not have Amari Cooper. We'll have to see what Amari Cooper's injury timeline's like, because it's more and more looking like somehow he broke his hand. And so I understand he was the busiest pass catcher in today's game with 9 targets for 6 receptions, 58 yards. Dude is just kind of becoming Mr. Reliable for Josh Allen. Khalil Shakir, when he got into the NFL, was really known for the deep passes, and dude's kind of become an underneath stallion here recently. So I do like Khalil Shakir a ton. I think you potentially, as we're looking rounding out the end of our benches, our flex spots, that's kind of where I'm looking at with Khalil Shakir, who's going to be a starter week in and week out for you. So definitely go see what it's going to take to start some Khalil Shakir. Caleb, I wish you would give me some more ideas to think about as I start to go try to make these trade offers. I hear you. But like I said, the data is not yet cemented on trades. And that's why the next player we're talking about is Deebo Samuel. 12.6 fantasy points. Really since week 6, dude has kind of been so-so. And so if the Deebo Samuel owner's probably panicking a little bit on Deebo Samuel because he hasn't been that elite level points per game producer that we were predicting, especially with no Brandon Ayuk. Like we said, this was kind of like the first week of Deebo Samuel being fully healthy, playing without Brandon Ayuk. 6 targets, 5 receptions, 62 yards, and I would love to see more from Deebo. Like, I really would. I really would. And I think whoever owns Deebo is probably going to be panicking, especially if they're in the playoff race. So I want to get Deebo Samuel onto my team because I do think coming down the stretch, we got Seattle, Green Bay, Buffalo. Some of these are going to be higher scoring matchups where they're going to have to throw the ball a lot more, not just rely on that ground and pound game with Jordan Mason, with CMC. Like some Deebo Samuel. I think he's a great level trade target. Someone that I'm trying to acquire and add to my team for week 11 fantasy football. If you like fantasy football, hit that like and subscribe button. On the way to 4,000 subscribers. We're literally like 70 subscribers away. So I appreciate all the love, all the support you guys are giving. We're answering every start sit question in the comments. So want to know how you did in week 10, how you're faring as we head into week 11. Want to help any way I can. Like I said, check out these 2 videos if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.